The clock showed 0100 hours on November 15, 1942. 8,400 yards south of Savo Island, the Kirishima cut through the black water with purpose and pride. Her crew believed absolutely in their ship's supremacy. They had trained relentlessly, learned to read the night sky like a book, and mastered the art of fighting when darkness fell. On the bridge, Captain Sanji Iwabuchi commanded with the confidence that comes from generations of naval tradition. His optical instruments were the finest Japan could manufacture. Rangefinders so precise they had turned the tide in previous encounters. Iwabuchi studied the darkness ahead, certain in the knowledge that Japanese vision technology gave his gunners advantages no other navy possessed. What the captain could not have known was that 8,400 yards away, another battleship had been watching him. Not through binoculars, not through the brilliant searchlight beams that sliced through the night, not through any of the optical systems the Japanese Navy had spent a decade perfecting. The USS Washington had been tracking Kirishima's every movement for 7 straight minutes, using something far more sinister, invisible electronic eyes that penetrated darkness, fog, and rain without difficulty. Those electronic eyes fed information into mechanical computers that calculated firing solutions with inhuman precision. The Americans opened fire at exactly 0100 hours. 16-inch shells screamed across the gulf between the two ships. The darkness erupted into chaos. 9 shells found their target with certainty. Some accounts based on Japanese damage assessments suggest the number reached 20. The numbers hardly mattered. The result was catastrophic. Within minutes, Kirishima's steering mechanism had seized up. Her main guns fell quiet. Seawater poured through massive ruptures in her hull. Fire consumed her superstructure and worked its way through her decks. By 0325 hours, the great ship tilted, rolled over, and sank into the deep. Between 212 men perished with her. The sea rescued another 1,098 survivors who clung to wreckage and flotsam. Captain Iwabuchi lived through those terrible minutes. As his ship went down, he filed a report to Admiral Nobutake Kondo claiming his guns had struck the American vessel. He genuinely believed this to be true. In the howling confusion of night battle, with shells whistling overhead and the deck buckling beneath his feet, he had no way to know the truth. Every single salvo his gunners had fired had missed their target. The American ship had stayed completely beyond visual range the entire time. She had appeared from nowhere like a phantom, delivered devastation with mechanical certainty, then vanished back into the darkness. The USS Washington, commanded by Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Lee, Jr., remained untouched throughout the entire battle. Not a single hit scarred her hull. But here was the revelation that changed everything. Not a single American shell missed either. This was not fortune smiling on the Americans. This was the direct result of radar-controlled fire direction systems turned loose against an enemy that could not even see the ship attacking them. The Mark 8 radar aboard Washington had maintained constant contact with Kirishima throughout the entire engagement. It fed targeting data continuously to the Mark 1A fire control computers, which calculated solutions faster and more accurately than any human crew could manage. This should not have been possible. Everything in Japanese naval doctrine, refined through decades of experience and sacrifice, insisted that the navy which controlled the night belonged to the side with superior binoculars and better trained lookouts. Japan possessed both these advantages. By every measure that seemed to matter in 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy held the upper hand. Yet something fundamental had shifted in the waters off Guadalcanal. The Americans had rewritten the rules of naval combat, and the Japanese were only beginning to sense the transformation. The full meaning of what had happened would take months to comprehend completely. The technological gulf between American and Japanese capabilities was so enormous, so beyond the comprehension of officers shaped by decades of Japanese naval progress, that even when Japanese commanders examined the evidence directly, they struggled to accept what it meant. The rise of American naval power was not born from a single brilliant invention or one moment of insight. It emerged from a collision between two industrial philosophies, two competing visions of how modern warfare should be waged, and one nation's fundamental miscalculation of an enemy they had judged as lacking sophistication and battle readiness. Japanese confidence in naval dominance had been earned through bitter experience. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905 had established the foundation. Since that distant conflict, the Imperial Japanese Navy had constructed a culture where excellence flowed from rigorous discipline, continuous training, tactical brilliance, and steady technological advancement. Officers spent years mastering the intricate choreography of night fighting, the mathematics of gunnery, and the complex science of torpedo tactics. The men serving beneath them trained without mercy. They learned to recognize ship shapes at extreme distances. They developed the ability to estimate range by sight alone. They practiced the mechanical movements of loading and aiming guns until their hands moved without conscious thought. This relentless preparation produced measurable results. Japanese lookouts could identify enemy vessels from greater distances than American observers. Japanese gun crews could achieve accurate fire more quickly after acquiring a target. Japanese torpedo specialists had created the Type 93 long-lance torpedo, a weapon unlike anything in any other nation's arsenal. This torpedo could strike targets 44,000 yards away while traveling at 38 knots. It used oxygen rather than compressed air for propulsion, leaving no revealing wake behind it. The warhead it carried weighed 490 kilograms, more than double the destructive force of American torpedoes. The Long Lance embodied the entire Japanese approach to naval warfare. Take existing technology, refine it through meticulous engineering, then deploy it through crews trained to extract every possible advantage from it. Battle after battle during the war's opening year proved this philosophy correct. At Savo Island in August 1942, Japanese cruisers had descended on an Allied force in the darkness and sent 4 heavy cruisers to the bottom in less than 60 minutes of brutal night fighting. Superior training and superior tactics had delivered the victory, but the Americans were engaged in a completely different competition. While Japanese naval development focused on perfecting what already existed, American development aimed at changing the fundamental nature of naval combat itself. To Japanese observers, this transformation remained hidden until the moment it became impossible to deny. American naval radar development began not with military demands but with pure scientific investigation. During the 1930s, physicists working at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington conducted experiments on how radio waves behave. They discovered that ships reflected these waves in distinctive patterns that could be detected and measured. The discovery was interesting. What made it truly revolutionary was the thoroughly American approach to converting laboratory findings into practical military hardware. By 1940, the USS New York had successfully conducted the first test of radar-guided gunfire. The apparatus was primitive by later standards, demanding many operators and extensive hand calculations. Yet it worked. Guns could aim at targets hidden beyond the horizon. Admiral Ernest King noticed this development. He would eventually assume command of the entire United States fleet. King recognized immediately that radar represented something far larger than a marginal improvement. It was a complete reshaping of naval warfare itself. He committed himself to driving faster development and wider deployment. King's vision extended beyond simply bolting radar equipment onto existing ships. He imagined radar integrated throughout every naval operation: detection, tracking, directing fire, navigation, guiding aircraft. Every function that had relied on human sight could be enhanced through electronic systems or replaced entirely. The obstacles were daunting. In 1940, radar technology remained experimental and unreliable. Converting it into something battle-ready demanded solving countless technical challenges. Making the equipment small enough for shipboard use required manufacturing advances that pushed industrial boundaries. Achieving the precision needed for accurate gunnery demanded quality control exceeding most pre-war industrial capabilities. The Americans tackled these problems not through flashes of individual genius, but through disciplined industrial organization. MIT's Radiation Laboratory opened its doors in October 1940. Within 12 months, it employed more than 4,000 scientists and engineers. During the war years, this single facility developed more than 100 distinct radar systems, each designed for specific battlefield needs. The radiation laboratory stood as American organizational power applied directly to technological warfare. Leading minds from universities across the nation converged on Cambridge. Theoretical physicists who had spent their careers exploring abstract problems now devoted themselves to practical solutions. The laboratory functioned according to principles that seemed almost chaotic compared to traditional military research structures, yet the results came with remarkable speed. Different teams pursued overlapping questions simultaneously. Collaboration between groups was actively encouraged. Successful breakthroughs were shared immediately across the entire organization. When projects failed, the lessons were documented and distributed within days. This created a system where a breakthrough in one area rapidly accelerated progress in neighboring fields. The laboratory's production was astonishing. Mark IV radar for tracking aircraft, Mark VIII for controlling gunfire against surface targets, Mark XII for improved surface detection, Mark XXII for short-range anti-aircraft defense. Each system addressed specific requirements identified from actual fleet operations. When battle reports revealed gaps in existing equipment, engineering teams modified designs and tested improvements within weeks instead of months. From the beginning, manufacturing considerations shaped the research process. Laboratory engineers worked directly with industrial partners to guarantee designs could be mass-produced efficiently. Radar types were evaluated not simply for performance in testing, but for practical manufacturability. Components were standardized across different systems to reduce production complexity and simplify maintenance in the field. This integration meant laboratory innovations reached deployed fleets faster than Japanese systems traveled from initial development to first production units. Japanese radar work remained largely confined to university laboratories through 1943. Talented scientists made genuine progress in component development, but no organizational structure existed to convert these academic advances into thousands of identical units distributed throughout the fleet. Research efforts remained isolated from each other. Different laboratories fought for the same scarce resources instead of pooling efforts. The pathway from theory to factory to warship never achieved the systematic organization that Americans had created. This was industrial capacity, concentrated and focused. Japan had scientists equal to any in the world. What Japan lacked was the industrial depth required to transform brilliant ideas into thousands of identical units deployed across an entire fleet. The distinction was not about scientific brilliance, but about systematic execution at massive scale. The Mark VIII fire control radar entered service in mid-1942. It could follow surface vessels from 25,000 yards away in absolute darkness, calculating range, bearing, and rate of movement with sufficient accuracy to direct the main guns. The system had flaws. Early versions suffered from interference and phantom targets. Yet American naval thinking accepted imperfect systems if they delivered tactical advantage. Japanese tradition demanded perfection before anything could be deployed operationally. This philosophy meant Japanese radar advancement, while scientifically sophisticated in certain areas, fell behind in real-world application. Japan had developed a 10-centimeter cavity magnetron by 1939, a significant technological accomplishment. Yet a culture of perfectionism delayed deployment until systems satisfied impossibly stringent reliability standards. By the time Japanese radar began appearing in meaningful numbers aboard combat ships, American systems had already cycled through multiple generations of improvement. The distance between them widened. American radar development was not a single concentrated program, but dozens of simultaneous efforts, each feeding lessons and improvements back into the broader industrial system. When Mark VIII radar showed limitations, engineers developed Mark XII with superior target discrimination. When Mark XII proved inadequate for anti-aircraft work, teams created Mark XXII specifically for tracking fast-moving aircraft. Each new version required months to complete, not years. Each advancement was distributed throughout the fleet as fast as ships could be retrofitted with the equipment. Japanese naval development could not match this tempo. Resources remained scarce. Industrial capacity was consumed producing ships, aircraft, and conventional weapons. Radar work was split among multiple competing research teams with little real coordination. No organization equivalent to the radiation laboratory existed, no unified push towards simultaneous improvement across all applications. By the middle of 1943, American warships typically carried multiple radar systems, each optimized for its specific purpose. SG surface search radar provided long-range detection capabilities. Specialized fire control radars guided the guns. Air search radars spotted approaching aircraft far enough away to mount effective defense. These systems worked together through plotting rooms where operators combined electronic information into a complete picture of the battlefield. Japanese vessels in the same period usually carried one radar system at most, primarily used for early warning. Integration with weapons remained minimal. Gunnery relied heavily on optical methods. In night combat, Japanese ships found themselves partially blind while fighting enemies who could see perfectly. The Guadalcanal engagement illustrated this disparity with terrifying force. Rear Admiral Lee commanded Task Force 64, centered on battleships Washington and South Dakota, escorted by 4 destroyers. His assignment was straightforward: prevent Japanese naval forces from reinforcing Guadalcanal. Intelligence reports suggested a formidable Japanese task force was approaching, built around the battleship Kirishima and multiple cruisers under Admiral Kondo. Lee possessed qualifications few commanders matched for radar-directed night combat. Before the war, he had captured 5 gold medals in Olympic shooting competitions at Antwerp in 1920, demonstrating the discipline and calculation that would shape his entire command approach. More significantly, Lee had participated in radar development and testing since its earliest experimental stages. He understood the equipment's capabilities and its shortcomings in ways most commanders simply did not. He had studied the technology directly. He had participated in trials. He grasped both its tremendous potential and its real limitations. This knowledge granted Lee something rare among naval commanders in 1942. Genuine confidence in systems that seemed almost supernatural to his contemporaries. He trusted the electronic information enough to base combat decisions on it, rather than demanding visual verification. Lee had overseen exercises using radar for gunnery control. He had witnessed the system function in practice. He knew that radar could generate accurate firing solutions at distances where optical systems could see absolutely nothing. This knowledge freed him to exploit capabilities that would have made other commanders hesitate in actual combat. Lee's task force established contact at 23:17 hours on November 14th. SG radar detected Japanese vessels at more than 18,000 yards. Lee exercised remarkable discipline. He did not order his guns to fire. Instead, he allowed the Japanese force to draw nearer while his fire control radars acquired targets and computed solutions. This required exceptional restraint. His crews could hear the enemy ships approaching through sound-powered telephones. Lookouts strained to catch glimpses of shadows moving against the darkness. Yet Lee maintained his trust in the radar system, resisting the pressure to open fire visually. The Japanese force, relying completely on visual detection, remained ignorant that they had already been spotted and continuously tracked. The Japanese attempted to split their formation and swing around Lee's flanks, a tactically sound maneuver against an enemy relying on visual detection. Against an opponent armed with radar, the maneuver was futile. Lee's plotting rooms maintained absolute awareness of Japanese movements and positions. At 0100 hours, with Japanese ships at 8,400 yards and still completely unaware of Washington's presence, Lee released his guns. Washington's main battery erupted with 16-inch shells fired according to radar calculations in complete and absolute darkness. The first salvo struck. Kirishima's superstructure exploded into flame, providing the first visual confirmation to Japanese observers of where their enemy was positioned. Yet by that moment, the outcome had already been decided. Washington's fire control radars maintained their lock on the Japanese battleship. Salvo followed salvo, each one driven home by mechanical precision and electronic certainty. The Japanese battleship fought back desperately, but her searchlights and rangefinders couldn't cut through the darkness, the thick smoke, and the driving rain that swept across the water. The handful of salvos she managed were nothing more than educated guesses based on the flash of American guns. They went wide, every single one, 7 minutes. That's all it took. The ship took hit after hit, each one tearing through her hull, punching holes in her superstructure, shattering compartments. She was crippled beyond any hope of recovery. Dead in the water, her fighting days finished. She'd slip beneath the surface 3 hours later, but the battle itself was already over. In those brief 7 minutes of fury, the American battleship had thrown 75 16-inch shells across the darkness. At least 9 of them found their mark, possibly 20. The Japanese ship had managed only a handful of poorly aimed shots in return. It wasn't about courage or training. It wasn't about who wanted it more. It was about capability, pure, fundamental, technological capability. The American commander had fought with perfect information. Every target was clear, every distance was known, every shot was guided by radar that could see through anything the night could throw at it. The Japanese commander had fought blind, completely blind. When he filed his report afterward, he noted something that seemed impossible to him. The Americans had demonstrated detection and fire control abilities that shouldn't exist. Japanese observers reported the same thing. American shells kept arriving with devastating accuracy, yet no searchlights cut through the darkness. No optical rangefinders swept the sky. How could this be happening? Some Japanese officers began to whisper a theory. Maybe the Americans had developed new optical systems, extraordinary systems, systems beyond anything Japan had built. The idea that Americans might be using radar to guide their fire in total darkness seemed absurd, ridiculous even. Japanese doctrine said it couldn't be done. Radar wasn't precise enough. Radar couldn't handle fire control. Except that was Japanese radar they were thinking about. American systems had leaped ahead in ways Japanese engineers couldn't have imagined. Nobody in Japan's technical community understood how far ahead the Americans had gotten. But the evidence kept piling up. A staff officer named Lieutenant Commander Toshikazu Omi worked in the 8th Fleet, assigned to study American tactical patterns. He spent his time collecting after-action reports from one engagement after another, and a disturbing picture emerged. The Americans kept opening fire at ranges where no one should be able to see anything. Their accuracy in darkness exceeded what any optical system could explain. American ships maneuvered through the night as if they possessed complete awareness of Japanese positions, regardless of the weather or visibility. Omi reached a conclusion that frightened him. The Americans had detection systems that were fundamentally superior to anything Japan possessed. His analysis suggested American radar technology had progressed about 2 years ahead of Japanese capabilities. When he submitted that report in early 1943, senior staff officers dismissed it. Too pessimistic, they said. The idea that Americans, a nation Japanese propaganda had spent years mocking as soft and industrially inferior, could be 2 years ahead of Japan. It was psychologically impossible to accept. But Omi was right. And it was getting worse. By mid-1943, the gap had widened. 3 years now separated American and Japanese capabilities. American destroyers being commissioned in 1943 carried radar suites more powerful than those installed on Japanese battleships. American fire control systems were being linked to mechanical computers that could calculate firing solutions automatically. The Mark 37 gun director combined radar tracking with optical rangefinders. Everything fed into Mark 1A computers. Mechanical brains made of gears and cams and servo mechanisms, each one continuously solving the mathematics of ballistics. The computers absorbed target data, information about the ship's movement, wind speed, powder temperature, everything that mattered. They calculated gun elevation and bearing, adjusting continuously as targets moved. Earlier mechanical computers required human operators to make manual adjustments based on where shells actually landed. The Mark 1A was different. It integrated radar feedback directly into its calculation loops. If radar showed shells falling short, the computer automatically corrected the elevation for the next volley. This closed-loop fire control was revolutionary. It removed the human reaction time from the entire targeting cycle. The result was sustained, accurate fire at ranges where no human eye could function. American battleships could strike targets 20,000 yards away in complete darkness or fog and maintain hit rates that would have been excellent in daylight gunnery. Japanese battleships trying to answer that fire were reduced to aiming at gun flashes, unable to see where their shots landed, unable to correct their aim. The sophistication went far beyond individual systems. American combat information centers collected radar data from every source aboard the ship. Surface search radar painted the overall picture. Fire control radar locked onto specific targets. Air search radar swept the sky for aircraft. Operators in those centers took all that information and synthesized it into a complete picture of the battle. What was friendly, what was enemy, where everything was positioned. That picture got distributed throughout the ship through internal communications, reaching every gun crew, every damage control party, every officer making decisions. This integration created command advantages that matched the technical advantages of the individual systems. American commanders fighting in darkness possessed accurate real-time information about where their own forces were and where the enemy was. They could move their ships based on complete battlefield awareness. Japanese commanders, without that integrated system, had to work with fragmented reports from lookouts, who could only see a small piece of the action. Japanese gunnery still depended on human calculation. Fire control parties worked through the math, but the final firing solutions required trained operators making manual adjustments by hand. It worked fine when you could see your target continuously. It was nearly useless when your target only existed as a radar return. Every aspect of naval warfare showed this technological divide. American carrier task forces carried air search radar that detected incoming aircraft more than 100 miles away. This let them position their fighters to intercept before Japanese planes could launch their attacks. Japanese carriers didn't have that capability. Their fighters depended on eyesight. Often their first warning of incoming American aircraft was watching the Americans arrive overhead. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 showed this radar advantage at the fleet level. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded a Japanese carrier force, 9 carriers with over 400 aircraft. He intended to use his aircraft's superior range to strike American carriers while staying outside their strike range himself. His entire plan depended on his scouts finding the Americans first and his aircraft reaching them without getting intercepted. Neither of those things happened. American radar picked up Japanese scout planes at extended range. When Ozawa launched his first wave, 69 aircraft, on June 19th at 8:30 in the morning, American radar detected them as they were forming up over his carriers. By 10 o'clock, American fighter directors had already sent their fighters racing toward intercept points. The Japanese strike flew straight into a coordinated defense. Fighters had been positioned by radar guidance to maximize their defensive effectiveness. Fighter directors in the combat information centers watched radar screens showing the locations of American fighters and Japanese aircraft. They issued continuous radio updates to Hellcat pilots, enemy position, altitude, heading. The pilots approached Japanese formations from optimal angles, achieving complete surprise even in daylight. Japanese strike leaders found themselves intercepted before they could get into attack position. Coordinated attacks from multiple directions shattered their formations. Pilots who got through that gauntlet faced a wall of anti-aircraft fire from ships that radar had given plenty of time to prepare. Proximity-fused shells filled the sky with fragments that damaged aircraft, even when the shells missed by hundreds of yards. Only 27 of those 69 aircraft came back to Japanese carriers. Not one achieved a hit on an American ship. Ozawa launched 3 more strikes that day. The second wave went out at 10:56 with 129 aircraft. American radar detected them at 9:15. Fighter directors scrambled additional combat air patrol and positioned forces for intercepts. 97 Japanese aircraft were shot down. 6 damaged American ships, but not critically. The third wave launched at 10 o'clock with 47 aircraft. 27 were destroyed. The fourth wave went out at 1:30 with 82 aircraft. 73 were shot down. By the time darkness fell, Japan had lost 346 carrier aircraft in a single day. American combat losses totaled 29. The numbers told a story of systematic slaughter. Japanese formations were being destroyed with industrial efficiency. Each wave received the same treatment: radar detection at long range, fighters directed to optimal intercepts, coordinated attacks that broke formations apart, anti-aircraft fire guided by radar tracking. The system worked regardless of what Japan sent or what tactics they tried. Ozawa watched from his carrier Taiho as strike after strike launched to attack and strike after strike failed to return. Strike leaders reported by radio that they were under attack by fighters who seemed to know exactly where the Japanese formations would be. The only possible explanation was that American detection capabilities exceeded anything Japanese intelligence had imagined. The impact on surviving pilots was profound. One carrier division commander, Lieutenant Masatake Okumiya, would later write about what the Philippine Sea meant. Japanese pilots began to feel they were fighting an enemy that could see them coming from impossible distances. It wasn't superstition, it was an accurate understanding of what radar had created, a kind of tactical omniscience that Japanese pilots had no defense against. American technological superiority extended into the weapons themselves. The proximity fuse had been developed by American scientists and entered combat use in January 1943. The fuse carried a miniature radar transmitter inside that would detonate shells when they passed near aircraft, multiplying the lethality of anti-aircraft fire. The first combat use happened on January 5, 1943, when the cruiser Helena fired proximity-fused 5-inch shells against Japanese aircraft off Guadalcanal. The results were immediately obvious. Hit rates against maneuvering aircraft skyrocketed. Shells that would have been clean misses with contact fuses now detonated close enough to fragment aircraft with shrapnel. The proximity fuse represented American technical achievement at its peak. The device had to survive firing forces exceeding 20,000 times gravity. It had to work reliably after experiencing extreme acceleration, vibration, and temperature changes. It had to distinguish between aircraft and surface clutter like ocean waves. It had to function through rain, clouds, and varying humidity. It had to be cheap enough to manufacture by the millions, because shells were expendable. Solving these problems demanded advances across multiple fields. Engineers miniaturized vacuum tubes to create radio transmitters small enough to fit in shell casings. Chemists developed battery technology that could survive gun-firing shock and deliver power for the few seconds a shell stayed in flight. Designers created arming systems that prevented the fuse from detonating too soon, but activated it at a safe distance from the firing ship. Manufacturing engineers developed processes that could produce millions of units with consistent quality. The proximity fuse program employed more than 4,000 people working across laboratories and factories. Component production was scattered to reduce security risks. Final assembly happened in dedicated facilities. Every single unit went through quality control testing before acceptance. By 1944, the factories were producing more than 100,000 proximity fuses each month. Japanese pilots suddenly faced defensive fire that exploded near their aircraft even when gunners didn't aim perfectly. The psychological impact was enormous. Pilots reported shells bursting near them with uncanny accuracy. The effect was amplified because Japanese intelligence couldn't figure out how the fuses worked. Without understanding what they faced, pilots couldn't develop countermeasures. Japanese engineers knew proximity fuses were theoretically possible. Multiple research groups studied them, but building them required industrial capacity, precision manufacturing, and quality control at scales that Japanese industry couldn't match, while also producing ships, aircraft, and conventional weapons. The proximity fuse wasn't just one invention. It was the product of an entire industrial ecosystem optimized for high-technology mass production. By late 1944, the technological gap had become so severe that American and Japanese naval forces were essentially fighting different wars. American planning assumed comprehensive radar coverage, automated fire control, and integrated command and control systems. Operations were designed around these capabilities. American doctrine treated night operations against surface targets as routine because radar made darkness tactically meaningless. Japanese planning still assumed most engagements would be decided by visual detection and manual gunnery. Night operations were considered high risk, demanding specially trained forces because Japanese capabilities remained primarily optical. This meant Japanese commanders planning operations faced constraints that American commanders had eliminated through technology. The Battle of Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944, illustrated the gap perfectly. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura led a force through the darkness, 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, 4 destroyers, trying to attack American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. American patrol craft detected him at 2:36 in the morning. Radar tracked his progress as he advanced up the strait into an ambush. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf commanded the American blocking force. 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, multiple destroyer squadrons, all positioned to cross Nishimura's T, the classic naval maneuver of bringing overwhelming firepower to bear against an advancing column. But this was T-crossing with radar guidance. American destroyers launched torpedo attacks guided by radar tracking. American battleships opened fire at approximately 20,000 yards, with their main batteries directed by radar fire control. Nishimura's force was destroyed methodically. Both battleships went down. The cruiser sank. 3 destroyers were sunk. The remaining destroyer fled damaged, the only survivor of a doomed mission. The American forces suffered remarkably few losses. What unfolded was hardly a battle in any traditional sense. It resembled something closer to a systematic dismantling. Japanese warships had sailed directly into carefully prepared traps, advancing into waters where American radar operators tracked every movement with complete precision. When American guns finally spoke, surprise was absolute, and the accuracy that followed proved absolutely devastating. Nishimura's fleet moved through darkness completely blind to the threat surrounding them. His lookouts searched the night in vain. American battleships remained invisible until the first salvos began tearing through Japanese hulls. The moment Japanese forces realized American ships were present came when explosions erupted among their vessels. There was no gradual recognition, no time to prepare, just sudden, violent death arriving from the darkness. Attempts to respond proved futile. Japanese gunners had no targets to engage. American battleships maintained distances that made them impossible to spot through conventional means in the pitch black. The entire engagement concluded in less than 30 minutes. Overwhelming firepower had simply crushed an opponent fighting blind. The battle exposed a harsh new reality. Night advances through constrained waters against radar-equipped enemies amounted to suicide. When Lieutenant Commander Omei studied what had happened, his conclusion was stark and unforgiving. Japanese tactics had been sound, decades of doctrine supported them, but only against opponents operating under similar technological constraints. Against enemy forces equipped with radar and automated fire control systems, those same tactics became fatal. The methods that had worked for generations suddenly guaranteed destruction. The lesson was clear, yet arrived too late to reshape how Japan conducted the war. Only after hostilities ended did the full scope of American industrial capability become apparent. From December 1941 through September 1945, American shipyards launched 28 fleet carriers. Japan managed to construct 17 carriers during that same stretch, and most of those came from converting existing hull designs rather than purpose-built construction. Beyond these large carriers, American production included 71 escort carriers, smaller vessels built on merchant ship frames specifically designed for submarine hunting and support of amphibious operations. These ships operated with less individual capability than fleet carriers, yet they distributed fighting power across the Pacific's vast distances. Japan produced nothing comparable. Japanese naval thinking centered on fleet carriers engaging in decisive fleet battles, not on spreading air power continuously throughout vast ocean areas. American shipyards delivered 8 new battleships to the fleet during the war, all belonging to the Iowa or North Carolina classes. These vessels incorporated radar and fire control systems from their initial conception, with interior designs optimized from the start to integrate electronic equipment seamlessly. The North Carolina class, authorized before war began, underwent modernization during construction to incorporate improved radar systems. The Iowa class represented a step forward, incorporating lessons learned from early combat. Their electrical systems and internal layouts were designed specifically for radar integration, engineered from the keel upward with electronic warfare in mind. Against these American designs stood the Yamato and her sister Musashi, representing the absolute peak of traditional battleship engineering. 64,000 tons of displacement, 18-inch main batteries hurling shells weighing more than 1 ton each, armor plating designed to withstand any projectile any existing battleship could fire. These represented engineering triumphs, the most massive battleships ever built anywhere. Yet their entire design philosophy rested on assumptions that had become obsolete. Everything centered on visual range finding, supported by optical equipment of extraordinary precision. Their fire control relied on trained crews manually computing solutions based on visual observation. Radar appeared almost as an afterthought, equipment retrofitted into spaces never intended to accommodate it. Integration proved poor. Capability remained limited. Against opponents equipped with radar, the Yamato and Musashi's advantages in armor and firepower meant little when they could not effectively bring their guns to bear. The contrast between these two approaches illustrated fundamentally different visions of modern naval warfare. Japanese designers prioritized perfecting traditional naval combat methods. American designers prioritized incorporating new technologies that fundamentally transformed how naval warfare operated. Japanese battleships were constructed to dominate traditional gun battles at visual ranges. American battleships were engineered to fight integrated warfare, where radar-guided guns engaged targets far beyond visual range. This divergence extended across every category of warship. 377 American destroyers compared to roughly 63 Japanese destroyers. Destroyers built late in the American War carried radar systems, providing detection, tracking, and fire control capabilities that approached pre-war cruiser sophistication. Japanese destroyers remained essentially gun and torpedo platforms with minimal electronic capability. 232 American submarines against 126 Japanese submarines. American submarines carried radar enabling surface attacks at night with minimal detection risk. Japanese submarines depended on periscope observation, a severe limitation against adversaries who maintained vigilant watch. American escort carriers, 71 vessels built on merchant hulls, provided distributed air power throughout the Pacific. These ships supported amphibious landings, conducted anti-submarine patrols, and protected convoys from air attack. Japan built no equivalent. Japanese doctrine emphasized fleet carriers for decisive battle, not sustained distributed air operations. Numerical superiority alone understated the actual disparity. An Essex-class carrier commissioned in 1944 carried more fighting power than 2 or 3 Japanese carriers from earlier war years. An American destroyer from 1944 could execute missions that would have required a cruiser in 1941. As the war progressed, the combined effect of numerical and technological advantages meant American forces increasingly overwhelmed Japanese forces by wider margins. The Essex class represented the integration of industrial power and technological innovation. 27,100 tons of standard displacement, 33,900 tons at full load, 872 feet of length, each carried between 83 and 108 aircraft, depending on the mix of planes aboard. Numbers alone failed to capture what made these carriers dominant. Multiple radar systems provided comprehensive battlefield awareness. Air search radar detected aircraft beyond 100 miles. Surface search radar tracked ships to the horizon. Height-finding radar determined the altitude of detected aircraft. Fire control radar guided anti-aircraft defenses. This integrated electronic sensor suite connected through combat information centers, staffed by specialists trained in radar interpretation, giving Essex-class carriers battlefield awareness that earlier carriers simply could not match. 24 Essex-class carriers were completed. 32 had been ordered initially, but 8 were cancelled following Japanese surrender. Of those completed, 17 saw combat in World War II. These ships provided the striking power that eliminated Japanese naval aviation, supported amphibious operations across the Pacific, and ultimately attacked Japan itself. These carriers operated with aggressive tactics that would have been reckless without their technological advantages. American carrier task forces regularly operated within striking range of Japanese land-based aircraft because radar provided adequate warning to organize effective defense. Combat air patrol could maintain position over task forces and receive guidance toward intercepts through fighter directors monitoring radar displays. This technological advantage allowed American carriers to operate in waters Japanese carriers deliberately avoided as too dangerous. Japanese carriers late in the war were reduced to operating from positions where land-based air cover could protect what their own radar could not. The situation had completely reversed. Japanese forces sought shelter. American forces roamed freely, confident their technology provided decisive advantage regardless of enemy numerical strength in any given location. The technological transformation was so profound that by war's end, American naval forces operated from assumptions Japanese forces could not replicate. Night operations became routine for American ships equipped with radar. Japanese forces continued treating night operations as requiring special circumstances and specially trained crews. American carriers attacked close to enemy bases. Japanese carriers operated defensively under land-based protection. American battleships actively hunted enemy warships. Japanese battleships were relegated to secondary roles, their main batteries largely irrelevant against enemies striking from distances exceeding visual range. The lessons Japanese officers drew would shape their understanding of modern warfare for decades. Lieutenant Masatake Okumiya survived the war and eventually achieved the rank of lieutenant general in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. His extensive post-war writings, including co-authoring an analysis of the Battle of Midway with pilot Mitsuo Fuchida, examined how technological inferiority had systematically undermined Japanese tactical advantages. Okumiya graduated from the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy in 1930. He commanded a carrier division during the war, flew combat missions, and planned operations. His perspective blended tactical field experience with strategic-level understanding. Following the war, he became one of the most significant interpreters of Japanese naval history for Western audiences. His central argument held that Japanese forces entered combat with tactics and training optimized for the technological conditions of 1941. American forces had continuously raised that baseline through persistent technological advancement. By 1943, Japanese advantages in visual detection and manual gunnery had become irrelevant because radar and automated fire control were deciding engagements. Japanese forces were fighting through outdated methods against enemies who had fundamentally altered the nature of combat itself. Okumiya emphasized this represented not a failure of Japanese courage or tactical capability. Japanese pilots and sailors fought with intensity and determination throughout the war. Unit cohesion and fighting spirit remained strong despite deteriorating material conditions. Yet determination could not overcome systematic technological disadvantage. No pilot, however skilled and brave, could defeat radar-guided interceptors that attacked his formation before it reached effective firing range. Lieutenant Commander Omei, whose wartime intelligence work had correctly assessed American technological superiority early in the conflict, received extensive questioning from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey following Japanese surrender. Survey interrogators found him the most dependable and precise source of information they had developed. He provided comprehensive analysis of Japanese operations, strategic choices, and evaluations of American capabilities. Omei had graduated from the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy in 1922. He served as staff officer across various fleet commands, positions providing access to operational intelligence and strategic planning discussions. His analytical abilities proved invaluable to American interrogators attempting to understand Japanese decision-making. His subsequent writings for the United States Naval Institute proceedings presented detailed Japanese perspectives on the technology gap. His 1951 article examining Japanese commentary on Guadalcanal offered insights that corrected American understanding of several engagements. He later consulted with Admiral Samuel Eliot Morrison on his multi-volume history of American naval operations in World War II. Omei's assessment concluded that Japanese naval forces had been defeated through systematic technological inferiority, rather than lack of courage or poor tactical decisions, making individual battles progressively unwinnable as the war continued. He estimated American radar and fire control technology held approximately 2 years' advantage in late 1941. By mid-1943, this had expanded to 3 years. By war's conclusion, it had grown to at least 5 years. The gap widened because American research and industrial capacity permitted rapid development cycles and continuous improvement, while Japanese capacity struggled simply deploying earlier generation systems. American radar development progressed through multiple iterations during the war. Japanese radar development labored to achieve widespread deployment of first-generation systems. The compounding effect of technological advancement meant early advantages grew exponentially. Omei concluded Japan's fundamental error was not failing to develop advanced technology, but failing to comprehend that industrial warfare required continuous advancement of technological capability across entire military structures. Individual brilliant systems proved meaningless if they could not be mass-produced, distributed throughout the force, and continuously upgraded. American victory stemmed from systematic technological deployment at scale rather than isolated technical breakthroughs. This understanding came too late to change the war's conclusion. For American naval forces, the war confirmed an approach to warfare that would define American military strategy for generations. Technology could create advantages so complete that traditional factors, individual courage, unit training, tactical excellence, became secondary. Technological superiority delivered returns exceeding any other military investment. Pacific War veterans returned home convinced America must never permit technological gaps to develop in America's disadvantage. Radar and fire control systems that defeated Japan led directly to guided missiles, computerized battle management, and network-centric warfare. The underlying philosophy persisted unchanged across generations. Remove humans from decision-making when machines perform better. Automate every process capable of automation. Integrate systems to achieve synergistic effects exceeding individual component capabilities. The Japanese Navy of 1941 was formidable, built through decades of experience and professional development. Officers were skilled professionals, having devoted careers to mastering their specialties. Enlisted personnel received training exceeding standards of most naval forces worldwide. Equipment was current and properly maintained. Tactics were sophisticated and thoroughly rehearsed. By conventional standards, the Imperial Japanese Navy stood among history's finest naval forces. Yet conventional standards proved inadequate when combat's fundamental nature transformed. Experience and training built for one technological era proved insufficient when that technological baseline shifted. Americans did not simply defeat the Japanese Navy, they rendered the kind of navy Japan had built obsolete. The fast battleship, mass torpedo attacks, night engagements using superior optics, everything Japanese doctrine emphasized became secondary to the overwhelming advantage of detecting enemies while remaining undetected yourself. The battleship Kirishima had been modern and powerful in 1941. Her optical rangefinders represented the finest technology available. Her crew had trained for years in visual gunnery and night combat techniques. None of this mattered, confronting an enemy tracking her through electronics she could not detect, computing firing solutions through machines she could not match, and striking with accuracy her optical systems could never achieve. In 7 minutes of radar-directed gunfire, USS Washington demonstrated technological superiority's decisive nature. The engagement was not competitive. It was not a battle between equals where courage or skill could determine outcome. It was systematic destruction of an opponent lacking the technology for effective response. Kirishima's crew fought bravely. Her officers made tactically sound decisions based on available information. They were fighting blind against an opponent who could see perfectly. This captured the essential truth of American technological superiority in the Pacific War. Victory belonged not to the Navy, with most courage or finest training, but to the Navy that successfully deployed advanced technology throughout its force. Individual heroism, tactical genius, and professional excellence mattered, but they could not overcome systematic technological inferiority. American forces held overwhelming advantage, and the gap widened continuously. Japanese forces fought with increasing desperation as they recognized they were overmatched fundamentally, not merely numerically. By 1945, Japanese naval forces resorted to kamikaze attacks because conventional tactics had become futile against enemies, whose technology made them nearly invulnerable to traditional naval combat. The Japanese Navy continued fighting until the final day. Officers and sailors demonstrated courage, earning respect from enemies. Yet courage could not bridge the technological chasm separating the two forces. The future arrived November 15, 1942, in Savo Island darkness when Washington's radar locked onto Kirishima and showed naval warfare had entered a new era. That future belonged to the nation that had built it, deployed it, and continuously refined it through systematic industrial effort, transforming laboratory advances into fleet-wide capabilities. Americans had not merely won the naval war, they had redefined what naval warfare meant.